Hey, what's up, folks? Welcome to another edition of Talkin Ball here on Texas Football. I'm lifetime Longhorn Rod Babers, joined by my man CJ Vogel as well. Hey, CJ Vogel, you're a lifetime Longhorn as well, ain't you?
Yeah, I graduated. Absolutely.
There you go. Boom. Lifetime Longhorn. Sorry, I didn't want to shortchange you there. But man, CJ, lifetime Longhorn as well. And pleased to be joined by him because we're going to break down Texas versus Washington. And this talking ball, we're going to focus specifically on the offensive line of Washington versus that defensive front for Texas. Actually, it's a really good matchup. I think actually Longhorn fans haven't given enough respect to that Washington offensive line. We'll talk about that and get into it. And before we do, though, big shout out to one of our great sponsors, and we really appreciate John Donovan doing great work for us as always. John is a proud Texas Exes. He's a lifetime Longhorn too. He's a life member, and his wife and all 6 of John's siblings are all UT grads. So we're talking about legacies, folks. So it is this deep Longhorn family tradition that led John to dedicate his firm to proving and providing total wealth management for Texas alumni, employees, family, and friends. John is a certified financial planner who has spent over 30 years providing investment, retirement, and insurance and estate planning and services and solutions for his clients. So please give John Donovan a call and give him a chance, and you won't regret it. But John Donovan and his Longhorn Wealth team, they're at 972-707-4900. That's 972-707-4900. longhornwealth.net. That's longhornwealth.net. Thank you to John Donovan and his Longhorn Wealth team doing great work for us. All right, let's talk, CJ, about this offensive line for the Washington Huskies. And I saw the headline just maybe it was last week, that they won the Joe Moore Award. Which is given annually to the best offensive line in the country. Offensive linemen usually don't get a lot of individual accolades. This is given annually to the best offensive line in the country, and they gave it to the Washington Huskies. Give me your thoughts about this group. You've been watching and doing some deep diving, and you actually wanted to make this focus, talking ball about this offensive line. Why?
I think it's the engine that makes this offense go. I mean, obviously, all signs, the big highlights, as you mentioned, don't normally go to the offensive line. They go to the Michael Penix at quarterback. Obviously, Dylan Johnson has 1,100 yards. And, Roma Dunze and Jalen Polk, the guys out wide are making all the plays. But those plays wouldn't be available if it weren't for the 5 guys up front who have been spectacular. You mentioned the Joe Moore Award awarded to the best offensive line. It's in their locker room right now. It's in their facility. That's something that they see every single day that they walk in. What's most important, or most, I would say, impressive, they've only allowed 11 sacks this season.
Yep.
From that, only 5 have come from offensive linemen, and only 4 have come from what we expect to see from the starting 5 this upcoming Monday in the Sugar Bowl. So 4 sacks allowed from this starting 5. That's incredible. It goes to show just why they are, the Joe Moore Award winners.
It's a great story too. I mean, because think about it, the offensive line coach for them, and if I'm not mistaken, it's Scott Huff. He's the offensive line coach. He was on the Jimmy Lake staff,
right?
And remember that Jimmy Lake staff, I thought they would be a decent team too. They were disastrous, especially on the offensive line. They averaged only 3.1 yards per rush that season. The last season for Jimmy Lake and crew, that was 120th in the FBS. And they went 4-8. Then they hired Kalen DeBoer and his crew, and they decided, the offensive coordinator, Ryan Grubb, to keep Scott Huff around. He convinced them, like, nah, man, my system works. That was an aberration. And he was right. They gave up 11 sacks just this year. You talked about that's 4th fewest in the country. And I believe the season before that, they gave up 7 sacks the season prior. So you're talking about a team that's allowed, 18 sacks in the last 2 seasons. So the system, it does work. And something else that's phenomenal about this story, they had a backup center now, because their 6th-year center to start the season, I believe his name Mateo Millet, he got hurt. And then this is, I think, while a lot of Longhorn fans may think Texas has a huge advantage in this contest, Parker Brailsford. He moves from right guard to center for them. He was a redshirt freshman, I believe. And everybody thought this would be a huge disadvantage for them. Turns out this young guy is playing really, really well. and it was a seamless transition. And we know how crucial center is to the offensive line. You're talking about the quarterback of that O-line. And then they had two fifth-year seniors who actually ended up being kind of the stabilizing forces around him. They're the two guards now, Nate Kalepo and Julius Bulow. It should have been a huge, I think, kind of a detriment to the offense, to the offensive line, losing your sixth-year center.
Absolutely.
But it wasn't. CJ, it was not. It actually ended up helping the O-line.
Yeah. No, it's been seamless for them. 7 pressures allowed, only 1 sack for Brailsford this year. Obviously, you mentioned kind of the lesser snap count. But, I mean, at that point, and again, he's only playing at around 6'2.5" and 290, 295 pounds. This is not a guy that is a big body, which is interesting. And I think a lot of Texas fans are pointing at Devondre Sweat and Byron Murphy right across the line of scrimmage thinking, that'll favor us. Not so fast. Because, again, you would think other defensive linemen across the country would look at it and say, we're going to go pick on the small dude. You mentioned the 2 guards, Bulow and Kalepo. Those are the 2 biggest bodies on the offensive line. 6'6", 315, or 6'6", 327 for Kalepo, 6'8", 315 for Bulow. Wow. 2 big bodies, 2 bodyguards, really. No pun intended, if you will. But I mean, they're sitting there right there, and I really like what they do on that offensive line. They hide Brailsford a good bit. And I mentioned this, and we'll get into the what I saw against Oregon in the Pac-12 championship game in a minute. But they hide Brailsford very well with how they use him as a pulling guard in a sense. They use him in the double, when they pull guard tackle, guard center, everything around that. They use him in a way that they don't need him highlighted to make the block, if that makes sense. So I think that's something that they scheme around specifically. And with Dylan Johnson, the running back, 201 carries this year. He's over 1,100 yards, 5.5 yards per carry. 99 of those 201 attempts come off of the tackle's rear. So it's not like he's pounding the ground through the middle, because they know that center is not necessarily the guy that's, the focal point of the rushing game. So they're going to pull 2 guys, and they're going to get outside so that they can get away from the middle and where there would be a mismatch.
That's a great point about Brailsford and how they don't necessarily overburden him.
Right.
They try to put him in the best position to be successful. And I was thinking about this too with this Washington. And some of the stuff that I watched, there are times where in inside runs, they will duo block at the point of attack. Which means there's kind of a combo block at the point of attack. And they'll zone block the rest of the inside run. It's really interesting stuff, man, if they're doing. It kind of goes to your point about them not trying to overburden the young man. They're going to give him an assignment. It's usually going to be with some help, one of those bodyguards, like that term you talk about. And if there's zone blocking a lot of it, and he's not at the point of attack, still makes his job a lot easier. It actually, I think, caters to his strength, which is he's undersized, but he can move.
Yeah.
Right? So you're zone blocking, he's moving, getting to the second level. That's a great point, CJ. I'm with you on that. It's kind of what makes their running game successful, even though it's a complementary piece to the offense.
No, absolutely. And you mentioned being able to move on the front line. That whole unit moves well. That with Penix specifically, he likes rolling out to his left. They have a number of plays where they move the entire offensive line in a true rollout, immediate rollout kind of fashion, just so that in a rollout instance, it's much more difficult unless the quarterback holds onto the ball too long to get to the quarterback. And so that's something that Penix, who has been in the system under DeBoer for now 5 years, has gotten really good idea and understanding about that. When you move the pocket, there's probably a guy from the backside who won't be blocked. Get the ball out and don't let him reach you. Otherwise, a strip sack is in the picture. You can get sacked, obviously, incompletion. Stay on schedule with the play, throw it away, and live to see another down. They do a tremendous job of that.
And you saw a lot of that in that Arizona State game, that Oregon State game, where they were able to get inside pressure, interior pressure. And one of their adjustments is let's just move that pocket a little bit and give Penix a little bit of room. And he can move. I mean, he's a quarterback. But after all these surgeries, he had multiple ACL injuries. I mean, this guy was a track star in high school, so he can move really well, and he's comfortable throwing on the run. And you pointed out, because I love the fact that now analytics has allowed us to attribute sacks to quarterbacks. sometimes quarterbacks just hold on to the ball too long. Quarterbacks, they, make the wrong read. There could be a lot of different reasons why a quarterback can be the reason that a sack takes place. Now with Penix, his comfort in this system avoids a lot of sacks.
Great awareness.
Yep. Yeah, totally agree with that. And like I said, if analytics has proven that sacks are kind of a more a quarterback, responsibility and attributed to the QB, he does get rid of the football quickly, and he's comfortable within the system. Yeah. Very rarely will you see him so confused, so discombobulated, he's holding on to the football and doesn't know where to go with it. Usually, I think he gets in trouble where he's so confident. We talked about this on a live stream yesterday, where he believes that a player should be in a certain position, and there's a miscommunication, but he's still going to throw it because his faith in the system and his trust in the system. So it's really interesting why they get sacked very few times. I mean, it's just you really can't get to them because he's really aware of pressure and gets rid of football really well. And as you just pointed out, man, the offensive line, they excel. I heard Chris Peterson say it's the best pass blocking O-line in the country.
Wow. Well, I mean, the numbers, if we talk about only 4 sacks given up by this 5, Texas is going to have to get home when they're in heavy set 12 personnel or whenever they block straight up man-to-man and they have an extra blitzer going straight to a running back. That's been where they've been susceptible in the passing game. Oregon got to them. Oregon State got to them. A little bit of Arizona State. Obviously, you mentioned the interior pressure. Washington didn't score an offensive touchdown against Arizona State at home when Arizona State was 1-6. That was a 15-7 game where the only touchdown for Washington came on a pick 6 late in the fourth quarter. So they are susceptible to getting beat in the interior. How they combat that is, again, moving the pocket, whether it be a halo pass protection where offense line moves left and the left guard pulls to the right, as we've seen with Hayden Connor as well. That's one of those things that I think a lot of play callers have adopted from a Lincoln Riley offense when Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray were really lighting the world on fire. You play action to the left, the offensive line moves left, the left guard then pulls around as that lead blocker and pass protection, now creating a kind of a makeshift time for your quarterback to remove himself from the pass rush and find a guy deep. That's what they do very well on, and that's where they take their deep shots is when they move the pocket out, Penix rolls out, finds a guy deep, hucks it. But again, Rod, we've talked about it. There's some reliance and almost a blind dependency on Rome Odunze making a play in which he's got an extra body around him. Not many interceptions this year for Michael Penix. 6 have gone when targeting Rome Odunze. So that's, if there's a pressure there and he, thinks, where do I go with the ball? I'm going with Rome. That's where, things can get a little dicey for him at times.
And it tracks because Rome Odunze leads the country in contested catches, in a contested catch rate because, hey, man, he'll throw it up 50-50 ball. He totally trusts that guy. And one thing about Penix that we just talked about his ability to avoid sacks. Look at sack rate versus pressure, basically sack rate on dropbacks versus pressure. Only 9.4% of pressures against Michael Penix ended up becoming sacks, converted into sacks. For Quinn Ewers, you're at close to 30% of that. Now, Texas doesn't allow a lot of pressure. Texas is top 5 in the Power 5 in pressures allowed. We're not talking about the Texas O-line. We're talking about Washington. But it just shows you even putting a lot of pressure on Washington and on Penix isn't enough. You got to be able to convert those into sacks and convert those into splash plays. And that's what they do a really good job of neutralizing as an offense. Let me ask you about the run game, though, getting back to the run game with this offensive line. I found a stat, and shout out to my man, the Stats Award does a great job, Parker Fleming, throwing out there. And this is as of, I believe this is week 12. So it's somewhat current, but not totally up to date. But you were looking at yards before contact per rush. They had Washington in the top 10 at 3.1 yards before contact per rush. There's FBS. Now this is actually week 10. I take that back. So it's week 10 here. It says here. But it in Texas obviously is really high up there as well. Texas at 2.4 yards before contact per rush. They're really good at giving Dylan Johnson some daylight All right, before teams can, get a hand on them or get a body on them. Texas is a top 5 rush defense in the country. I heard you talk about this last night. This, this matchup, Texas rush defense versus this rushing offense, it actually could end up deciding this game in a lot of ways. It decided the Alamo Bowl last season because they were able to run the football, averaging over 5.5 yards per rush, 158 rushing yards. Texas tried to play with a light box last year, fewer defenders than they had blockers, and they couldn't stop the run. They did neutralize the pass. They did a really good job. That was one of the best pass defensive performances by Texas all season, considering the competition, but they couldn't stop the run. This year, is it possible Texas could, with a light box, same basic game plan they had last year to keep them to 1 of 10 on 20-plus yard throws, less than 60% completion percentage, lowest yards per attempt in the last 2 years for Penix? Keep that game plan, but still now be able to stop the run with a lighter box, considering how good your front seven is.
No, I'm glad you brought this up because I think we'll see a very similar approach from a game plan schematic approach from PK. It's obviously do not get beat deep. Let them, dink and dive their way down the field. Make it methodical. Make them earn every yard. Don't give up the chunk plays. And if they want to run the ball, get past, Alfred Collins, Byron Murphy, Tavondre Sweat in that front seven, because so far we've not seen a team do that consistently this season. Nope. If you go back and you look at the last 5 teams Texas has played, I don't think any of them have averaged over 2.5 yards per carry. Texas has been that good defensively in that running defense that it's almost, tilting the hands of what play callers have to come in and think about how they're going to move the ball. There's no more complementary football when you play Texas. It's either we got to have a passing game or we're not going to move the ball at all, or our punter is going to have a very long night and a worn out leg the next day. It's one of those things that the reputation is now preceding itself because of who's on the front seven for Texas. And I think that's one of those things you mentioned. How can you win the game if you're either team? For Washington, it's a lick of rushing success opens up the entire playbook. Now the play action's there. You can sit back and you can move the pocket once again because you know that the run game is having linebackers bite more than they usually would. They see a pulling guard. They see the pocket move. They now have to adjust as a result. So the running game, if Texas is able to stop it, which they didn't last year, it should play into their favor on paper. And again, there's going to be wrinkles. There are going to be some twists. There always are in a game with this type of magnitude and in a bowl game. But I'm with you, Rod. I think when you look at this Texas front seven, it certainly plays into their advantage in stopping the run and making them beat Texas deep.
Yeah, no, like I said, that game plan last year, if you haven't watched it was a really good game plan. It just had one fatal flaw, was that they couldn't stop the run with a light box, and their money down defense wasn't great. This year, those are 2 areas where Texas is now top 5 in the country. So that same game plan would have a very different outcome with this defense. I
got one for you, Rod.
Give it to me.
On the topic just now, I think Texas is more athletic in their front seven, but something that Washington does, or more athletic in their front seven than last year. Let me pose it that way. With Anthony Hill incoming, it certainly increases the athleticism. But one trick and one kind of, switch up in the game plan and the style in which Washington plays has always been their motion. They have 65% of their snaps involving some sort of motion. That's 5th most in the entire country. As a defensive back, knowing that you're going against a team with a lot of passing prowess, how does that motion really kind of affect, coverages, communication? How often is it that, we get a look that we didn't see because of the motion that was coming our way? How do we adjust to that on the fly? How difficult is that?
It's very difficult. I mean, these guys, they shouldn't be that uncomfortable with now the pre-snap motions and shifts, because Sark loves pre-snap motion shifts. I mean, he's big in it. If Caden DeBoer's around, and I always say these 2 offenses, honestly, these 2 kind of teams, that's a doppelganger like feel with these offenses, and honestly with these teams a little bit too. But getting back to it, I was talking to Brian Harsin about this one day. He called motion funk. Every coach has a different term for it. He called it funk. Some coaches call it candy, trying to get a defender to lick the lollipop. You know what I mean? All this kind of stuff, right? Got different names for it. But motion essentially causes emotion. Watch what motion does to a defense and how often they can overreact to it, but they have to react to it. You can't, right? Because it's going to change the strength usually of the offense. It changes the responsibility oftentimes of defenders. You can use motion to basically to indicate what a coverage is. If a guy travels, usually that means he's in man coverage. They're just so, and you can use it as leverage, right? They call now the cheetah motion. That's because Tyreek Hill was famous for doing it. But essentially, just you want to get him on the move with a running start and snap the ball while he's running. Now he can only be parallel to the line of scrimmage, but it's still a running start for a really fast player. Sark has actually stolen that cheat motion and used it as well. So man, there's no doubt as a defender, it's just tough. It can really, in an extreme way, it can test and expose lack of leverage. It can give away your defensive responsibilities and what your coverage responsibilities are. I think also, man, it changes the defense in terms of their overall, what's the strength, what's the weakness, and that's going to change who's responsible for it. If I'm a coach, 65% of my snaps with motion ain't enough.
Right.
I'd use it damn near every play.
I
really would.
I'm with you.
Yeah, there's no downside to it other than if your players are undisciplined, you can get a lot of pre-snap penalties.
Yep.
We've seen that even from Texas, right? If you're undisciplined, but there's just so many reasons to use it. It really is. So many advantages.
No, I'm glad you brought up that cheetah motion because Sarkisian does use it. He implemented it, but not necessarily always with Worthy. He uses it with Jatavian Sanders a little bit too. Yeah. Which is I don't know if that's often used with tight ends at the NFL level. Can't imagine it is. But it's interesting because Sanders is already such a mismatch that if you can get him even that little bit more of a head start or even more of that extra leverage on the outside and man coverage, it creates just that much of an advantage for Quinn Ewers in that Texas offense. So I love that you brought that up because it's, like you said, I love the idea of motion on every pre-snap alignment for the offensive team. So it's interesting what the board does, but Sarkisian, as you mentioned, he does it so often already that this should be something that Texas is very well versed in seeing and practicing already this season.
And the thing about the Washington offense, because they use so much pre-snap motions and so many shifts, they take their time. Their pace is very slow. They're about 75th in the country in pace in terms of plays per minute. They take their time, so they do give you time to adjust to the motion. They're doing it, and it's very deliberate while they're doing it. It's intentional, but it's usually to match up hunt or to indicate what the defense is in. So they're not trying to do it and try to catch you off guard. Sometimes I think Sark is doing it to catch a team off guard, use a lot of motion shifts, and then when they're lost in the traffic or while they're trying to process it, snap the ball. Washington doesn't do it for that reason. They'll take their time, get set. And I think the reason that they are using a lot of motion shifts is to manufacture matchups and manufacture leverage. Sark uses it for that too, but I think Sark at times it's more about I want to catch the defense off guard. I want to catch them in an uncomfortable situation more so than why Washington does it because Sark's pace is a little bit more up tempo than that.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I'm right there with you. What?
Okay, so before we get out of here, because I have a couple other things I want to go. So I know we're up against it here about that Washington offensive line versus the Texas defensive front. Do you blitz if you're PK this Washington defensive front if you can't get the organic pressure? Now, Texas defensive line with the interior defensive line they have with Sweat and Murphy, you're hoping you can get some organic pressure. But if you can't, their slide protection, they're moving the pocket, and you can't get some organic pressure, do you blitz?
I think so. Luckily, Texas has 10 guys on their team with 10 pressures on the quarterback already this season. Washington only has 4, comparatively speaking, on their front 7. So that is encouraging on that front. The issue is getting home. Texas doesn't get home as often as I'm sure they'd like to, but when they do get pressure, a lot of it is from the interior. Sweat and Murphy are fantastic. They can also go big. Add Alfred Collins out by a 5 tech, maybe 7, get him outside the tackles alignment there. There's a lot of moving pieces there, but you have to create interior pressure because that's really what disrupts all the running lanes and pulling guards specifically. We've seen it a number of times this year. I think it was against Rice at home. A pulling guard on fourth down was blown up by T'Vondre Sweat, who ended up taking down the guard, the center, and the running back for a loss of 3, all because he created that interior pressure. If you can continue to do that against Washington, you're going to have a good day.
Yeah, and Texas third in the country in pressures behind UCLA and Florida State, right ahead of Oregon. So they apply the pressure. Last season they were also top 5 in the Power 5 in pressure. They get the pressure. It's about ability to convert that pressure, especially against a quarterback like Penix who can move around. Before we get out of here, we got to thank the good folks, John Donovan and his Longhorn Wealth team. Just one more time, John is a proud Texas Exes Life member and makes him a lifetime Longhorn, and his wife and all 6 of John's siblings are all UT grads, folks. So it is a deep Longhorn legacy and a Longhorn family tradition that led John to dedicate his firm to providing total wealth management for Texas alumni, employees, family, and friends. John is a certified financial planner who has spent over 30 years providing investment, retirement, insurance, and estate planning and services and solutions to his clients. So please give John Donovan and his Longhorn Wealth team a call today at 972-707-4900. That's 972-707-4900, or visit longhornwealth.net. All right, CJ, man, closing statement about that, the offensive line versus Texas defensive front. What are your thoughts to close things out?
If Texas stays schematically sound in the run game, they win the game. If they don't allow Dylan Johnson to get loose in the secondary and bust off a couple runs, I think that's too much of a task for that offense to be completely reliant upon the pass game. Texas isn't great back there, but they've been proven to jump routes and get inside the passing lanes and pick off a couple balls. If that's the case, Texas wins this game.
Yeah, it's interesting because I heard Chris Peterson had an interview with, I believe it was Brock Hewitt, and he said, I think the determining factor in this game will be the pass protection of Washington versus the defensive front for Texas, because he thinks that they'll be able to stop the run. Texas will be able to stop the run, and that Washington doesn't really want to run. They run because they have to, and they run the break tendency. They want to throw the rock, and then they'll just be able to do what they want to do, which is throw the rock because they won't be able to run. And then can Texas pressure and sack Penix? Can they
That's
make
the other
him
thing?
Yeah.
I real quick, I'm eager to see what wrinkles we have from Anthony Hill again, because we saw him against Alabama on the edge. We saw him against Oklahoma a lot on the edge. Since then, he's been that traditional middle linebacker at the Mike Will spot right there. Do we see him more on the edge to get that speed rush? We'll see.
I think you might see that Mo Blackwell package with him in there too, where you got Anthony Hill, Jalen Ford, and Mo Blackwell. You can pressure from a lot of different places. You got some hybrids on the field. 4 of the 5 sacks, to your point, that Anthony Hill has on the season have come in either the Bama game, the Oklahoma game, or in the Big 12 title game. Big games. They seem to want to put Anthony Hill in a position of big games, but in order to weaponize him as a pass rusher, you do have to stop the run. I think Texas will do that. Last little nugget here. Texas allowing 3.9 yards per carry with a light box this season. That's 6 defenders in the box or fewer. 34 rushing yards per game. 1.9 yards after contact per rush. With 6 or fewer defenders in the box, and only 2 explosive runs allowed. All of those categories lead the Big 12. So they are really good with a light box. I think they may have to deploy that philosophy once again versus Washington. All right. Thank you guys for joining us. Thank you, CJ, for all the great knowledge, brother. Great job as always. And thank you guys for joining us. Join us for another edition of Talkin Ball next week. We'll be breaking Texas football down, hopefully talking about a win. Until next time, hook 'em.